He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Media Watch. I'm Colin Peacock. The recent killing of MAGA champion and digital media entrepreneur Charlie Kirk was obviously a huge story for the media in America and around the world. Many who mourned him claimed his killing was also an attack on free speech, but while all that debate about free speech and airing opinions rolls on in the US, a new show rolled out here this week purporting to be about just that.
The elephant's all about the tough stuff. We want to talk about the stuff that's getting pushed to the edges, moving people into echo chambers and away from rational discussion.
Yes, that's right. This week we're talking about shame.
This week we look at the first outing of that and we ask, how can hot-button issues be aired now in a way that increases the peace? But first, we take a long look at how bad news about our economy has been piling up in the media lately, even as things might actually be on the up. It's certainly piling pressure on the politicians in charge of it, but are the media shining the light in the right places on our behalf?
Do you feel a bit embattled given what happened last week?
Oh, look, I don't know where that all came from. I mean, I know
it came from 0.9.
Well, it came from 0.9% Q2 growth, but I think, the reality is, it's been, no doubt about it, a very difficult quarter. You and I talked about it. We could feel it. You could see it.
That was the Prime Minister on Monday talking to Mike Hosking on News Talk ZB about the GDP figure that was much worse than the experts expected. Now, that was really last week's big news, but the fallout from that, including questions about his own job security as Prime Minister, rolled on into this week and are still rolling in some quarters of the media. And so are the stories about the state of our economy. For example, on Tuesday morning, RNZ's website led with an explainer that was headlined, "How much worse is the economy than 2 years ago?" While the spin-off was asking economists in a similar piece, why is the economy so shit? And the timing of the New Zealand Herald's annual Mood of the Boardroom survey, published last Wednesday, couldn't have been worse for the government, because the mood was, well, moody. And Business Desk's Dilipa Fonseca put it this way.
Like tourists roasting an underwhelming Wellington cafe on TripAdvisor, so the boardroom has delivered its verdict on Prime Minister Christopher Luxon's government, or at least on Luxon himself. A cabinet ranking of 15th may be the worst a PM has ever had, and leaves the public in little doubt about what executives really think of the PM's leadership, even if they might openly say otherwise.
Well, some were openly saying it too, but the same day, Business Desk was also reporting that the bosses of Freightways and Mainfreight were both telling them we are surely past the worst and on the way back up.
They're a bit of an indicator of how well the economy is doing, and Freightways managed to chalk up a record $13.20 share price when trading in Finis last night. So their CEO, Mark Trough here, who I actually saw here, was just having a chat before, is saying, look, hey, maybe we've sort of turned the corner here.
And on Monday, the Prime Minister was keen to tell Mike Hosking that the drop in GDP was the reality 2 quarters ago, and things aren't that bad now.
Previous 6 months we were growing strongly. We're growing again now. We'll grow even stronger as we go into Christmas.
Well, the Prime Minister will certainly be hoping so. If his year of growth ends without much of it, that will be a real political problem next year, which has an election near the end of it. But Christopher Luxon did have a point. If you go back 2 quarters, the GDP figures reported then were better than the experts predicted, and TVNZ's One News told the nation this.
The economy is slowly showing signs of life. Gross domestic product figures from the last 3 months of 2024 showing the country emerging out of recession and starting to grow.
And that prompted the Prime Minister at that time to talk positively about green shoots. Though interest.co.nz's Dan Brunskill told Media Watch at that time he was wary of that kind of talk.
I think what I have a bigger problem with is when people sort of promise that the green shoots will turn into a beautiful field of crops. Early indicators can be misleading and green shoots can die out. So we shouldn't get green shoots confused with sort of an economic turnaround or leaving recession.
Wise words, as it's now turned out. And reporting from that Mood of the Boardroom breakfast bash on Wednesday, Business Desk's Garth Bray also said this on the Herald Now show.
It's been a long winter. I mean, I wore the brown tie today because there's no green shoots. It's more like dead leaves.
Fair enough, mate.
The day after the latest GDP stats came out last week, Matthew Hooton claimed in his weekly New Zealand Herald column the economy has crashed completely off the track, and he said the government can't blame COVID or Donald Trump and his tariffs for the GDP slump. Former Finance Minister Ruth Richardson chimed in on the same day, calling on Nicola Willis to pass an emergency austerity budget.
It's clear that big government's got its throat on the economy. It's stifling the hell out of the productive sector. The government needs to put its house in order.
Now, presumably what Ruth Richardson meant to say there on News Talk ZB was that the size of the government was throttling the throat of the economy. Now, Ruth Richardson is also the current chair of the Taxpayers Union, who put out media releases urging Nicola Willis to get cutting, and also a stream of social media messages urging their followers to chip in with their opinions on how Nicola Willis should do the job. But of the opinion she shouldn't do the job was another former finance minister from back in the day, not afraid of unpopular decisions. In a long and slow-moving chat on the platform last week, Sir Roger Douglas read aloud from ACT Party policy statements from the past and then said this.
She's got the job, she needs to attend to it, and she's refusing to do that.
And he told the platform host Michael Laws that he had a plan the government should now follow, a pretty radical one.
So how would we do it? No personal income tax on the first, let's say 55 to 60,000 of income. So there'll be tax savings of around 9 or 10,000. Every New Zealander in work would have a retirement savings account, and of that, say 10,000 tax, 6,600 would go into that savings account. If interest earned on it was 6.1, they'd retire in 40 years' time, 50 years' time, with $4 million.
Sounds pretty good, but as the platform host Michael Laws pointed out, not taxing $50,000 to $60,000 of income would leave a bit of a hole in the Crown accounts to pay for things in the decades up till then.
But you're talking about a fundamental and a radical transformation of our taxation system and the way in which and a savings system as well. You've integrated them. I understand that. I get it. But what do you do in the meantime?
Well, I'll give you some indication. You have to work out how much it would cost. And it would be, I think we're talking 15 billion. I think it's a little more expensive than that. I think it's around 18.
But while Sir Roger reckoned he had a plan for that too, he didn't have a plan for what happens if he gets his way on Nicola Willis getting out of the way as Finance Minister.
I don't know. To be honest, it seems to me that there's got to be someone there in the National Party who could do the job. They've got a reasonably good group of new MPs, I think. And maybe you've got to be that radical that you bring one of the young ones through.
While Sir Roger Douglas was prepared to roll the dice on that, Sir John Key was shifting the blame elsewhere with Mike Hosking on News Talk ZB last week.
The people that are not doing their job are the Reserve Bank, who frankly, if they just walked around Auckland and Wellington for 5 minutes, could have felt the fact that the government needed help through monetary policy.
And later that same day, he was echoed by Heather Duplessis-Allen on ZB.
This is crazy. What happened yesterday is not Nicola Willis's fault. It is the Reserve Bank's fault. It is not a matter of opinion. It is a fact.
But not echoing that at all was the veteran political reporter Richard Harman, who called out Heather Duplessis-Allen and what he called hyperventilating from News Talk ZB's two-star host Mike Hosking for blaming the Reserve Bank. And also the Herald editorial last week.
The government can't afford to borrow more to provide economic stimulus, so the onus is on the Reserve Bank to cut deep and give New Zealand a jolt start.
Richard Harman said they were all willfully ignoring that the bank's job is to control inflation.
Sir John Key knows the bank's remit well enough to understand that his calls for it to stimulate the economy are essentially asking it to do something that is not within its job.
And there's been plenty of blame to go around lately in the media. That same Herald editorial last weekend began with this.
The All Blacks are losing, the weather's still wintry, and the economy is in the doldrums.
Not sure why the All Blacks should cop blame for our dodgy economy, but the same day, the Otago Daily Times blamed it on the just-beaten Black Ferns.
If the government hope for the feel-good factor distraction from the Black Ferns heading for the Women's Rugby World Cup final, it'll be disappointed.
The feel-good factor of Otago winning the Ranfurly Shield just the night before, it seems, did not make the ODT feel good. It said that previous government cuts to school and hospital building by this government, both huge sore points in Dunedin, had been downplayed, and the ODT concluded with this.
Pinning hopes on OCR cut by Christmas putting more money into the economy, along with some infrastructure spending and inflation coming down, seems to be the ploy. But there's no plan B.
And almost on cue, fresh spending on fix-ups for hospitals and schools was announced by the government on Tuesday, though mostly from Budget 2025 and 2024 funding. The Finance Minister talked that up as a stimulus on News Talk ZB with Ryan Bridge last Monday.
We don't want it sitting around in government bank accounts. We want it resulting in signed contracts, spades in the ground, high-vis and jobs.
But that very same day, there was high visibility for yet more bad data in the news about the economy. Under the headline, Wallets Under Siege, the Herald said almost half of Kiwis are going backwards financially, and that's according to a financial services company called Revolut. And the same day, the Herald said that among people with money to invest, confidence fell as well, and that's according to the ASB's Investor Confidence Survey. But not everyone in the media is lacking confidence. After his chat with the PM on Monday, Mike Hosking was getting emails from Kiwis overseas tuning into his show.
Hi, Mike. If 1 million people are going through Auckland Airport, that means 20% of us are travelling. Not a bad economy. I couldn't agree more.
And passengers passing through Auckland Airport in those numbers was, according to Mike, a sign that times are not so tough for everyone. Mike Hosking's producer Glenn Hart then gently pointed out that 1 million passengers passing through an airport is not necessarily evidence of 1 million prosperous people.
Stop being negative. When the numbers are in front of you, the numbers are in front of you. You can't argue with that many people with enough money to fly internationally and around the countryside for what is nothing more than a holiday for funsies.
But Glenn Hart really did have a point about the double counting and that 200 people a day currently leaving New Zealand permanently really would be one-way traffic and not travel for funsies, as Mike Hosking reckoned. But it also does show that the economic pain is not even. When the National Business Review released its annual Rich List in June, RNZ's money correspondent Susan Edmonds pointed out that the country's wealthiest people are collectively worth $4.5 billion more this year than they were last year, yet the net worth of all households declined by $4.2 billion the same year. And that looked a bit like wealth trickling up and not down, according to political communication professor Erin Davis at that time. And with the latest GDP stat out last week, we now know the economy was actually contracting at that time back in June. And on ZB's midday news show last Tuesday, Herald business editor-at-large Liam Dan said that in the days after the headlines seized on that 0.9% GDP slump, it may not even have been the right number.
There was a quirk in the way it was counted. There was something called a balancing item that was worth 0.6%. It's quite often that we see these numbers revised.
And when he was asked if public perceptions were just a kind of volatile mix of contrasting vibes, data and the reality, Liam Dan said this.
There are some green shoots out there. The consumer spending is up a bit. The risk is that we focus on a number that is very historic and beat ourselves up over it so badly.
Well, it's a bold business editor who'll say green shoots out loud in the current climate, but not beating ourselves up about it all is pretty good advice. As we've heard, plenty in the media will do that for us. Now, in amongst all this, a new Reserve Bank chief was appointed this week, Dr. Anna Bremen from Sweden. The same day, the Treasury released its latest long-term outlook, which warned that current policies are not suitable or sustainable. Stuff headlined Treasury's warning that government debt will hit 200% of GDP by 2065 if major policies today are not tweaked. And the Treasury Secretary Ian Rennie said there will be real economic and social costs to delaying reform. But like what?
GST at 32% and a pension age of 72 are among Treasury solutions to the financial crunch.
Well, that was the headline on an RNZ online story by money correspondent Susan Edmonds. But that long-term fiscal statement from the Treasury didn't get quite the same coverage as the mood of the boardroom and the Prime Minister's answer to loaded questions about his leadership this week. Now, in one sense, Treasury raising the alarm about our fiscal future isn't really news. Stuff's Tom Polarisation, for example, pointed out this week that the 2021 fiscal outlook was similar. And back in March, the Post's Luke Malpass asked the recently reappointed Treasury Secretary, could our kids end up poorer than we are? And Ian Rennie told him, yes.
We are less wealthy than many of our compatriot countries. It's really more important for us to have the quality of the policy environment to ensure that our kids are indeed wealthier than we are.
And Ian Rennie himself aired similar warnings in a big speech in February soon after his reappointment as Treasury Secretary. This week, Richard Harman recalled that on his politics side and that Ian Rennie had highlighted 4 things that need urgent attention. relatively low capital investment per worker, foreign investment below the OECD average, similarly low spending on research and development here, and markets with weak competitive discipline, meaning our prices are high by international standards. The government has begun addressing all those things in recent months, said Richard Harman, but of course that is only going to pay off in the long term. But based on the media response to the 0.9% GDP slump this week, there'll be plenty in the media about who should get the political credit if any of that pays off in the future, or the political blame if it doesn't. The recent killing of MAGA champion and digital media entrepreneur Charlie Kirk was obviously a huge story for the media in America and around the world. Many who mourned him claimed his killing was also an attack on free speech, which he exercised to the full. But those who caused offence by airing other opinions about Charlie Kirk have suffered a backlash. The most prominent, the ABC network's late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel, after this claim on the air last week.
The MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Kirk's backers reacted really badly to it. The Vice President J.D. Vance, for example.
So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer.
And at the memorial rally for Charlie Kirk, the President Donald Trump himself told the crowd this.
Influencers and others in our society who greeted his assassination with sick approval, excuses, or even jubilation. You've heard that. So have I. Couldn't believe it. You know the names. They're major losers, by the way. That will be proven out in a short period of time.
By then, the stand-up comedian had been stood down by the network's ultimate owner, Disney, for 6 days before making it back on the air last Wednesday with no little anticipation about what he might say.
He will be delivering what is being dubbed the most anticipated monologue in late night in years.
And Kimmel's monologue did call out the demagogues. Silencing comedians was un-American, he said. And whether political pressure played a part in the suspension or not, Donald Trump raised the prospect of taking entire networks off the air.
Maybe their license should be taken away. It will be up to Brendan Carr. So we'll have to see.
Now, Brendan Carr is the Trump-appointed head of the US broadcast regulator, the Federal Communications Commission, and he said that broadcaster licenses granted by the FCC come with an obligation to operate in the public interest. And he added darkly, it's important for broadcasters to push back on Disney programming that they determine falls short of community values. And Brendan Carr also pointed out that the FCC has a policy against news distortion. But that 50-year-old policy says pretty clearly broadcasters are only subject to enforcement of it if it can be proven they have deliberately distorted a factual news report. Expressions of opinion or errors stemming from mistakes are not actionable. And in Jimmy Kimmel's case, it was clearly no more than an opinion on an entertainment show made by an entertainer. Well, last Tuesday, during Kimmel's suspension, Carr told reporters he had not taken any action, and he claimed he himself was the victim of distortion from Democrats.
In distortion is they're completely misrepresenting the work of the FCC and what we've been doing. I saw there was a letter from some Senate Democrats that said the FCC threatened to revoke the license of Disney and ABC if they didn't fire Jimmy Kimmel, and that did not happen.
But in the background, other media companies have also been buckling to the president for reasons of political and commercial expediency. I took a look at this on Midweek Media Watch this week, and also TVNZ's spot check on its bias for news and some good news for RNZ on trust. If you missed Midweek Media Watch, you'll find that on our podcast page at rnz.co.nz or in our podcast feed from wherever you get your podcasts. But while all that debate about free speech and airing opinions and the public interest rolls on in the US, a new show rolled out here this week purporting to be about just that.
The elephant's all about the tough stuff. We want to talk about the stuff that's getting pushed to the edges, moving people into echo chambers and away from rational discussion.
Yes, that's right. This week we're talking about shame.
How can we come back from shame when our worst moment has become a digital stain?
The two voices you heard there are from TVNZ's former flagship current affairs show Sunday, presenter Miriama Kimmel and long-serving reporter Mark Kreisel. Now they're on screens again in a new series promising to tackle controversial topics which, in their words, we don't want to talk about for fear of causing offence or being cancelled. But the elephant, as in elephant in the room, isn't for TV, it's for NZME, the publisher of The Herald. New Zealand On Air is backing the idea with $250,000 for 12 episodes, and it's intended for the likes of YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, in other words, the online world where these debates create such polarisation and misinformation. The first episode of The Elephant launched last Thursday, and it had a very green tinge. Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau and former Green MP Golriz Garaman were talking about what it's like to be in the middle of a public shaming.
This was actually someone who put out a statement saying they're in a mental health crisis, resigned from their job, took full responsibility for what they were doing. And there was still at least 10 days of media from around 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. outside my home.
Golriz Garaman there talking about the media frenzy that centred on her after her resignation for shoplifting. And while Tory Whanau committed no crime, she said she was shamed over drinking too much in public, and she was pretty upset on Garaman's behalf about the media treatment of her.
There are certain journalists, and there's one journalist who just wrote the most horrific opinion piece about Golriz and said something like, oh, she's just using mental health as an excuse. It actually is an excuse. You know, people forget that she escaped as a refugee to this country, held in trauma. I was chief of staff when she was an MP. I witnessed the death threats that she received for weeks, for years, follow-up articles about something that has been and done and she has apologised for, re-traumatising her in the public again. I get angry.
But which journalist and which article? Well, Tory Whanau didn't say, and Media Watch was unable to find anything published recently that really fitted that bill. Now, after that, on The Elephant, there was a discussion with psychologist Dr. Dougal Sutherland, talent agent and PR rep Glenda Hughes, and Australia-based psychiatrist Dr. Tanveer Ahmed, who suffered his own public shaming in a plagiarism scandal. Indeed, he wrote a book all about it, In Defence of Shame. Now, in the end, on The Elephant, Miriama Kimmel and Mark Kreisel agreed that we all need to be better about exposing people to shame if they've fessed up. But was this week's debut episode really about controversial people rehabilitating themselves more than testing controversial ideas or taboo topics as they promised? I asked Mark Kreisel and Miriama Kimmel about that, and whether this is also a bid to occupy similar ground to Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, it is perfect timing in many ways, but it also has been perfect timing for quite a few years now, really, as we've observed, as so many others have, that it's harder to talk about tricky subjects, and we're kind of losing that art of being able to disagree and remain whole at the end of it. You know, people take a disagreement as so much more to heart, it seems, than ever before. You don't need to shout at each other. We're not planning to shout at you. We want to hear. And so, you know, what I keep saying to myself is, let me listen. That's like my little motto. Let me listen. Let me listen. Let me hear you. Let me really try and hear you, especially if I don't agree with you.
We were looking to, when we left TVNZ from Sunday, when we were taking out the back paddock and shot, we wanted to find a way to still keep telling our stories, and that was our fight. It was about still telling New Zealand stories, so we've been looking for a way to do that, and this is what we've come up with.
I was thinking about Gavin Newsom, leading Democrat, the governor of California, possible future presidential nominee. People think, after the Trump election, he launched a podcast, and the first things he did was engage with these people on the right, including Charlie Kirk, I think was his first guest, and then Steve Bannon, long conversations, and he was telling his disappointed Democrat followers, no, we have to engage with it. The election result has taught us this. We need to talk sensibly. Is that part of the spirit of this too, in expanding the people you invite onto the Elephant?
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And even though I think it's interesting bringing up the Trump analogy, because every time he's been elected, it's kind of like, how did that happen? Who are these people? What do they think about? And I think for a long time, those voices have been forced to the fringes. Come and chat to us, and rather than just throwing grenades and running back down to the rabbit hole, it's just trying to bring them out. And what we're finding when people are talking face to face, they're far less hostile towards each other.
And so, yeah, as Mark says, we're trying to say, you know what, we don't need to do that. We actually can talk. Let's give this a go.
Well, it's an old-fashioned idea, Colin. I mean, we used to have these all the time. You would have people coming together and talking about things. And it's just become so much more fractured over the past couple of years. One of our taglines is if it's too rude for dinner, then it's perfect for us. Well, at the moment, we're just getting underway kind of thing and finding our feet. So if it's too rude for dinner for your nana at the moment, but we'll be getting into some deeper things as we go along. And we're taking our time to, when we do them, if we want to make sure that we get the right people in for our debates, and
or just it's more about getting the right tone, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't want to create harm. We know that there is the risk of that, and so our mission within this is to reduce that risk as much as possible.
Yeah, with Charlie Kirk, he was about talking and listening. He was saying, debate me face to face, going to campuses, all of that. But I guess he wanted a kind of intellectual confrontation. One of the things you said, Mark, was we want to illuminate, not incinerate. But if you want to debate these hot topics, don't you want a bit of that? Don't you want a bit of argument?
We're totally getting that.
Yeah. Do you want it to end in hugs and tears and snot and all that sort of thing?
No, we want people to feel whole. That's really it. You can go out and you can leave us and you can not feel like you have been completely denigrated. That we want people to feel like they've been heard, that they've been listened to, and know even that they've been disagreed with. That's fine, but we just don't want them to.
We should be able to handle these kind of discussions.
But you say you want it all to be, polite and non-confrontational, no grenades. But isn't that what this is for? Being on the internet, you can freestyle, you can freewheel a bit. Otherwise, it will end up being like the sort of stuff people have seen on television. And maybe you've got New Zealand on your funding. Maybe they don't want you to be too raucous.
They haven't. Put
that sounds like a conspiracy.
Yeah. There's no editorial controls we
Prove
put
me
on
wrong.
us by New Zealand on here. No, this is about. Mark and I and Chris Mansfield and Julia Sartoria, we're a team of 4. It is about our wish to actually do something useful, and we're not going to always get it right.
Well, when you said, Miriama, that you weren't sure who the right people are for some of these, obviously it depends on the topic. I think John Campbell has previously talked about, fairly candidly, I think he said, look, we've got a shrinking number of journalists these days and program makers. They've got the same sort of 200 people and phone numbers in their contact books.
Yeah,
I'm sure he wasn't being literal about that number, but is there too narrow a range of people that get invited in to discuss things?
But we are casting our web widely. For instance, we've done one on the manosphere, and we couldn't find anybody in New Zealand that really fitted the bill for what we wanted to do. But we've found a broadcaster from Canada who's mates with Andrew Tate. He brings a really strong presence. There's a little bit of shouting in that one. But I come back to the illuminate thing, Colin. It's more, I think, less heat and more light. It's not going to be kumbaya at the end of it all the time. But if you take something away from it, if you take some notion of another side, then that's, I think, a good thing.
Yeah.
We have, for example, already online a media outlet, The Platform, staffed with sort of former cancelled broadcasters like Sean Plunkett, Michael Laws, Leah Parnapa. Sean Plunkett, by the way, dismissed your first episode as woke claptrap. Sorry to have to be the one to tell you if you didn't already know.
Okay.
But are you moving a little bit into that territory by saying you will talk to some people and cover some topics that, according to outlets like The Platform and others,
tone, though,
mainstream doesn't go towards?
I think it's more than tone. I think we've been at pains to be, journalists who've never really shown their political colours during their career or anything like that, just straight down the middle. And we had the great privilege when we worked on Sunday of broadcasting, and I use the word broadcasting, to a huge swathe of New Zealand, from all of New Zealanders coming on after Country Calendar. And so we understand that audience, and we understand what they're interested in, and we understand how to deliver things to them.
I've seen the trailer for next week's one that you mentioned earlier about toxic masculinity. That really does sound like one that does what it says on the tin as you've described it. You say there's a bit of shouting. I'll look forward to that. But just with the first episode, where you looked at shame, so the one that people can see right now, It felt to me like it didn't really do what you were saying the program's
I can
concept
understand
was
why.
all about.
Yeah, I can understand why you would think that, because we certainly had that conversation, and we had quite robust conversations around this episode. It's not just contentious subjects; it's things that we don't like to talk about. You know, topics that won't necessarily be contentious, but they're hard to discuss. It was so great to have Golriz and Tory come forward and really, with quite raw vulnerability, talk about the shame that they have carried and the shame that's been put upon them and how they've navigated that. So that's a good example in The Elephant of talking about something we don't want to talk about.
But isn't there widespread agreement? I think most people would agree that the reported abuse that they've suffered, that's wrong and bad, and very few people would condone that. And Tory whānau definitely seems to have suffered from dirty politics and some unfair media, reporting of rumours about her, alleged videotapes of stuff that never appear to exist. That seems very unfair. I think, that there's really broad agreement about that, even if they don't support or like or respect.
But have you heard Tory and Golriz talking about it before and the impact of the shame that they feel? I don't think we've heard their personal account in the same way as they do on The Elephant.
But are you not wary of the fact that you might be, in this sense, a sort of platform for their reputational rehabilitation? You even had an expert in that, and Glenda Hughes on the program, and Tory whānau said she wants to be a Green MP in the future, just in the past week or so, which might be a coincidence, but I was interested in their grievances about media and how that operated. That was interesting and probably would interest other people too, but it was kind of in the interests of both those people to turn up and talk about those things.
Yeah, although it wasn't easy to get them on to talk about it. I take your point, but shame is quite a difficult thing for people to talk about. And as Miriama says, we're looking at it in quite a broad way. We've set this kaupapa of what we want to do.
And you did, to be fair to you, Mark, you did sort of say to Golriz Garaman, look, shame has a kind of purpose, right? Without the exposure, we don't learn. There isn't that sanction prompting us if we fall below standards or break the law or whatever. But I was thinking of when something that Steve Braunius wrote at the time when he was looking at the public nature of the public reaction to the shoplifting, and he quoted a person who said, look, I've got sympathy with her, something's clearly gone terribly wrong, but she said, look, this is a person who's been telling New Zealanders that we're really bad, that there's a lot of racism, telling people that we've got all these bad things about our society that we should fix, and now she turns out to be really flawed. I felt like that was kind of missing.
So the structure is very much at the moment, the beginning is like an explainer. This is where we got to, or how we got to where we are. The second part is actually a real person, and then we brought that out to a discussion afterwards. So they were kind of our real people, and we were more interested in what it was like and being in the middle of all that.
Yeah. This is what happened. I brought it upon myself in these ways. In these ways, I felt like it was not so great. And really just to lay out what that is like, to have a fall from grace, to have to navigate that and the resulting shame. And can you come back from it?
Thank you for your comments on the first episode.
Well, are you able to reveal what topics you might be taking on?
Well, one of them is, should we legalise all drugs? And is the C word, not cancer, is the C word just a word? I mean, that's probably along the same lines as shame, in that it's, it's not a contentious, controversial thing that's going to make people yell at each other, but it is an exploration of how we engage with each other and how language impacts that.
We're looking at being Pākehā, what that actually means, if you can, if it's okay to stand up and say, I'm proud to be Pākehā, and what that means, what comes with that. I think that'll be an interesting one. So we're hoping we can be a little bit more topical at the time.
Exactly, so we can jump on something that happens of the week instead of...
because this isn't exactly, although it's digitally native, it's not really like interactive as such, right? It's a bit more like old-fashioned telly. You pick the guest, you pick the topic, you make the show. Yeah,
but yes, we do pick the guests, guests who will be useful.
Or even have the
topic.
option of like revisiting one issue if it feels like there was
that's
more
right.
to say. Or,
Right, yeah.
It's interesting though, Colin, trying to get people on to talk about things that they don't want to talk about. And one of the ones that we have done actually is people who are literally too scared to talk because they don't want to get cancelled at the US border. We've got someone from the Heritage Foundation, which is like the conservative think tank out of the US, who is very much in favour of keeping people out of the US. and the amount of people who just didn't want to come on because we were platforming that voice was really interesting. Quite prominent New Zealanders who've had, quite a lot to say in the media over the years did not want to go on with somebody who had such an opposing view. Some of them American citizens who live here now.
Absolutely. They'll end up being detained.
Yeah. One of the things we'll need to get into is the whole gender who's a woman thing as well. I think that's an important one.
Which is really scary because that has great potential for harm. And as we said, at the beginning, what we want to do is reduce as much as we can that potential. We don't want anyone to go away feeling like they have not been honoured. And so, this is one we're going to have to be really, really careful around.
That was Miriama Kimmel and Mark Kreisel, the presenters and creators of The Elephant, a new New Zealand On Air funded video series for NZME that's available on the Herald website, the iHeartRadio platform, and TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and all major podcast apps. Now, next week's episode suggests more friction than the first one. What is toxic masculinity and is it a problem is the topic.
Well, we disagree, and ultimately you don't get to control what men or women choose to do.
And this is why everything's failing for you guys. This is why your country's failing. It's a failed society. It's all a load of nonsense.
And that'll be out on all those platforms on Wednesday next week. And I'll be back next Wednesday as well with Midweek Media Watch at about 8:30 on Nights with Emile Donovan. That's it for this weekend though. Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Email us at mediawatch@rnz.co.nz, or you'll also find us at MediaWatchNZ on X. And you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to Media Watch, PO Box 123 Wellington. Follow Media Watch and listen on Apple Podcasts or any major podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.